Manhood Part 4. Duty may be defined as the thing that can be done, because it is the thing that ought to be done. To be dutiful implies a respect and reverence for others who are placed in authority in whatever capacity, parental, official, or governmental. It is, said Gladstone, coextensive with the action of our intelligence. It is the shadow which cleaves to us, go where we will, and which only leaves us when we leave the light of life. Fortunate the boy who is not an orphan, and blessed is he who knows how to appreciate his parents. If God has been kind to spare father and mother, every boy should be good enough to respect them. Nothing is more unbecoming than forward or contemptuous conduct toward them. The great proverb writer, thousands of years ago, said, "The eye that mocketh at his father, and despiseth to obey his mother, the raven of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagle shall eat it." That is, he shall come to an untimely end. The boy who heeds parental counsel shall be included in the promise of the first commandment, "Honor thy father and thy mother, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee." A boy should obey his parents because God commands it. It is a law written in our natures as well as in the Bible. General Hancock once hastily rose from his table and exclaimed, "I left my boy on London Bridge, and told him to wait there till I came back." He hastened to the spot, and there the brave boy was, and had been for several hours. Such obedience was the groundwork of a noble character. Obedience to parents is an evidence of Christian piety. It ought to be prompt, cheerful, and without protest. Such gives great pleasure to them, and no less to the boy. When Epaminondas, one of the greatest generals of Greece, conquered Sparta and delivered his own country, he was greatly applauded. "My joy," said he, "arises from my sense of that which the news of my victory will give my father and mother." Disobedience produces the keenest suffering in them, which sooner or later reacts on the boy. "A wise son heareth his father's instruction, but a scorner heareth not rebuke. A foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to his mother." Samuel Johnson was a disobedient lad. His parents were poor, and he had difficulties sometimes which seemed almost insurmountable, till he passed his 15th year. His father was a bookseller in Lichfield, England. On market days he used to carry a package of books to the village of Uttoxeter and sell them from a stall in the marketplace. One day he was sick and Samuel was asked to go in his place. From a silly pride he refused to comply. 50 years after this boy became the celebrated author and compiler of the English dictionary and one of the most distinguished scholars in England, but he never forgot his unkindness to his hard-toiling father. When he visited Uttoxeter, he determined to show his sorrow and repentance. Going into the marketplace at the time of business, he uncovered his head and stood there for an hour in a pouring rain, on the very spot where the bookstall used to stand. "This," said he, "was an act of contrition for my disobedience to my kind father." A boy should obey his parents because God's law contains a reason, "that thy days may be long upon the land." Obedience is here shown to be conducive to long life and prosperity. By it the boy learns self-control and a prompt submission as a principle of action. Such a boy in all probability will soon become a man of like character. He will obey the laws of health. Entering business, he will obey the laws of success, industry, perseverance, economy, and enterprise. His powers under full control, he also will be a law-abiding citizen in society. Such character tends to long life and the enjoyment of the gift of God. When Washington was a young man, he wanted to be a sailor, and his mother gave a reluctant consent. All things were ready. The ship lay off in the river. His trunk was in the boat, which waited to take him to it.
Going to bid his mother goodbye, he found her in tears. At once he ordered his trunk returned and sent word to the ship that he would not go. "I will not break my mother's heart to gratify myself," he said, and his mother replied, "George, God has promised to bless those who honor their parents, and he will surely bless you. Did he not do it?" He lived to be nearly 70 years of age and became not only a prosperous man, but the first president of his country. "I was sure," said his mother, "that George would be a great man, because he was a good boy." Coming home from the hayfield, a tired and hungry youth was met by his father at the gate and requested to go on an errand to the town 2 miles away. His first impulse was to refuse. A better thought came into his mind, and he consented cheerfully. "Thank you," said the father, "you have always been good to me. I was going myself, but somehow I don't feel very strong." Again the father thanked his son and turned to the house. The son hurried away and soon returned. As he neared the house, he saw that something unusual had occurred. The farm hands, instead of being at the barn as usual at that time of the day, were standing about the door of the house. As the son approached, one of the men turned to him with tearful eyes and said, "Your father is dead." He fell just as he reached the door. "The words he spoke to you were the last he uttered." Years passed, and that son relating this incident said, "I have thanked God over and over again for the last words of my father on earth. You have always been good to me." A boy should obey his parents because of the happiness and influence that come through it. A disobedient boy can in no wise be happy, while he who loves his parents and seeks their pleasure will have no reason to the contrary. In St. Stephen's Church, Philadelphia, one Sunday a tramp was numbered among the worshippers. His face was seen by the lines caused by dissipation. His shabby clothes were in striking contrast with the handsome attire of those in the audience.
When Dr. Wood, the blind organist, touched the keys of his instrument and began to play a soft, sweet melody, the man's eyes filled with tears and he buried his face in his hands. During the singing of the litany he sobbed aloud, but when Dr. McConnell in reading the commandments came to honor thy father and thy mother, the man, unable to restrain himself longer, cried, "Would to God I had done so, I would not be where I am." When Charles Lamb was a lad, his father sent him to the school of Christ's Hospital. He was very unfitted to make his way among the boys, for he was small and delicate. There was a great dislike throughout the school against certain articles of food. Charles was seen to gather up the morsels left after dinner and carry them away. Persevering in this practice, 2 of his school fellows determined to follow him and find out the mystery. Charles entered a large old building in Chancery Lane, went upstairs and knocked at one of the doors, at which an old man and woman presented themselves. The boys went back and triumphantly told the steward what they had discovered. He, being a just man, investigated the matter and found that the old people were Charles's parents, who had been reduced to great need. The news went from one to another. His fellow pupils immediately fell in love with him. The governor heard of it and gave relief to the parents and presented the boy with a silver medal. In this connection, a few words are not amiss regarding one's duty to those in authority. Honor is becoming those who are set over us at school or work. The spirit of obedience is not so much in words as deeds. Deeds show what we are, words what we claim to be. On one occasion, an English farmer saw a party of horsemen riding over his farm. He had a field he was particularly anxious they should not enter, as the crop was in condition to be greatly injured by the tramp of horses. He therefore dispatched one of the young farm hands, a lad of about 13 years of age, to shut the gate and on no account permit anyone to open it. The boy went as bidden, but was scarcely at his post when the hunters came up and ordered the gate opened. This the boy declined to do, stating the orders he had received and his determination to obey them. Neither threats nor bribes would move him. After a while, one of lofty dignity advanced and said in commanding tones, "My boy, do you not know me? I am the Duke of Wellington. I am not accustomed to be disobeyed, and I command you to open the gate that my friends and I may pass through." The boy lifted his cap and stood uncovered before the man whom all England delighted to honor, and in firm tones said, "I am sure the Duke of Wellington would not wish me to disobey the orders of my master, who has told me to keep this gate shut, and not suffer anyone to pass." Greatly surprised and pleased at this reply, the sturdy old warrior lifted his own hat and said, "I honor the man or boy who is faithful to his duty, and who can neither be bribed or frightened into doing wrong. With an army of soldiers as trustworthy as that, I could conquer not only the French but the world." Then handing him a glittering sovereign, the old duke put spurs to his horse and galloped away with his companions, while the boy ran off to his master shouting at the top of his voice, "Hurrah! Hurrah! I've done what Napoleon could not do. I've kept back the Duke of Wellington." Society can only exist under certain regulations which pure-minded and noble legislators have enacted, and which everyone pronounces right. It therefore devolves upon every boy to do his part in sustaining these laws, and to have a care for those who may have no tie binding them to us except the common tie of humanity.
His motto should be, "Do unto others as ye would that they should do unto you," desiring in life and asking in death no epitaph greater than that of the Earl of Shaftesbury, who, being presented with a donkey by the costermongers of London, said, "I ask nothing beyond this, that with patience as great and a resignation as unmurmuring as that of this donkey I may do my duty." What a phrase! My duty! Not my brother's duty, or my chum's, but my duty. My duty to God, to parents, to others, and to myself. When once the son of the Tsar of Russia was visiting America some years ago as a subordinate officer of the ships of the Russian fleet, a citizen of Philadelphia, who was entertaining the admiral in command, asked him as to the position of the Grand Duke on board. "How is he addressed?" was asked. "Always as lieutenant," was the reply. "Does he do regular duty as an officer on watch in his turn?" "Certainly. There is only one difference between him and the other officers. He is always more faithful to duty than anyone else." What a tribute! What was said of this royal son may be said of every boy. "Let us be found doing our duty, if this be the day of judgment," said Colonel Davenport in the Legislative Council of 1780 at Hartford. An eclipse of the sun so darkened the room and surrounding country that many thought it was the day of God's wrath. Life such a life that no matter when the judgment comes, you may be found doing your duty, thus meriting the eulogy conferred upon Colonel Hutchinson. He never professed the thing he intended not, nor promised that he believed out of his power, nor failed in the performance of anything that was in his power to fulfill. In all circumstances of life and dealings with others, do noble things, not dream them all day long, and so make life, death, and that vast forever one grand sweet song. To be honest, as this world goes, is to be one picked out of 10,000. All other knowledge is hurtful to him who has not honesty and good nature. The best that a boy or man can do is to be honest. He will find honesty profitable. Not only will it pay in a material way, but it will bring satisfaction with self, and will command the esteem and admiration of all with whom he comes in contact. Without honesty of purpose and act, there can be no substantial or lasting success either in business or any other undertaking in life. Be honest in order that you may be successful and content as well. Honesty is the best policy, cannot be excelled as a moral maxim. As an aphorism, it cannot be revoked. He who heeds it will avoid wrong, but he who disregards it will cease to do right. The word is sometimes used in a legal sense as that which is determined and enforced by law, sometimes in a worldly way as that which looks to public opinion as its motive and end, but Webster defines it to be upright, just, fair in dealing with others, free from trickishness and fraud, acting and having the disposition to act at all times according to justice or correct moral principles. That boy who adheres to these is, as Pope declared, the noblest work of God. That there are tricks in all trades is an acknowledged fact, and when resorted to secure advantage over another, it is nothing less than theft, which is fraught with peril and liable to bitter remorse. A little theft, a small deceit, too often leads to more. 'Tis hard at first, but tempts the feet, as through an open door, just as the broadest river runs from small and distant springs. The greatest crimes that men have done have grown from little things. At a general election in England, a candidate personally unknown to the voters of a certain borough was asked by party leaders to do his best for election. He belonged to a good family and was a lawyer of promise in London. His path to success was open, as the borough belonged to his party. When he mounted the platform to address the electors, his eyes fell upon a board opposite, on which was scrawled with charcoal, 40 pounds. He suddenly became pale and confused, stumbled through a short speech, and then hurriedly left the stand.
A few days later, he rose to speak in another town, and again the mysterious words written on the wall confronted him. Again he left the platform, and that night retired from the contest for the seat in Parliament. Not long after, he disappeared from public life and retired to an English colony where he hid himself on a ranch. It was found that the words referred to a theft committed in his youth, which he supposed had been forgotten, but which had clung to him all these years. Lapse of time had not concealed it, and when on the verge of victory, defeat through someone's reminder and a gnawing conscience pushed him from the race.
Honesty is a trait of character which sets a boy off to advantage. He has no dark shadows or corroding memories to fear. The idea that some boys have, make money, honestly if you can, but if not, make it anyway, is wrong. Madison C. Peters says, capital is not what a man has, but what a man is. He who is honest will not take a pen from another, would not represent an article to be what it is not, gives the equivalent for the price paid, whether seen or unseen. The boy, when exhorted to steal some fruit as no one would see him, had the right idea of honesty when he remarked, "Yes, there would, for I should see myself, and I don't intend ever to see myself do a dishonest thing." Abraham Lincoln, when a clerk in a grocery store, made a mistake of a few ounces when selling tea to a little girl. In the evening, he walked between 2 and 3 miles to rectify the mistake. When the state officials of Illinois advocated the policy of repudiation of a part of the public debt, Stephen A. Douglas was carried on a mattress from his hotel to the meeting where the repudiation was about to be adopted. He wrote a resolution which he offered as a substitute for the repudiation ordinance, which carried, resolved that Illinois will be honest, although she never pays a cent. Adam Clark, when a boy worked in a linen factory. In company with his master, he was working in the folding room when one of the pieces was found short of the required number of yards. "Come," said the merchant, "it is but a trifle. We can soon stretch it and make out the yard." He thereupon unrolled the cloth, taking hold of one end of it himself and the boy the other. "Pull, Adam, pull," he said, pulling with all his might, but the boy stood still. The master said, "Pull, Adam." "I can't," replied the boy. "Why not?" asked the master. "Because it is wrong." A long argument followed, in which the usages of the trade were strongly and variously enforced, but all in vain. Upon this, the master told him that such a boy would not do for a linen manufacturer, and would better look out for some other employment more congenial to his own mind. He did so, and in after years, through hard work, became eminent as a writer and preacher. Years ago, in a town of Germany, a poor boy lived in an old house. He formed this resolution: honesty in everything and with everybody. The street in which he lived was in the middle of the city, yet quiet and retired. This boy was eager to make money, but dearly as he loved it, he loved honesty and integrity more. When he reached manhood, he married a young woman of sterling character. She was beautiful and good. Their house was neat and their furniture simple.
In one of the closets was a set of old Dresden china. Behind the china closet there was another, which no one would ever have suspected being there. To get to it, the china had to be lifted out and the tight-fitting panels taken apart. One night, as they were about to retire, a faint knock was heard at the door. The young man opened it, and who should be there but the prince? He was invited to enter. After the young man had stirred up the fire and made things pretty comfortable, the prince told his errand. He was about to leave his home in the city to go he did not exactly know where. He did not care to have any person know his whereabouts. The officers of the government were angry with him, and he was about to leave to get out of their way. But he had some valuable treasures which he did not wish to carry with him, and having heard of the integrity of this young man, he desired to leave them in his care, offering to pay him for his trouble. The young man declared himself pleased to accommodate his prince. "I have it here," said the prince, and he drew a wide girdle from under his vest. It was double, and was held together by springs which could not be seen. It was lined with soft wool, and in the wool lay the treasure, a collection of the most precious and dazzling stones. The young man closed the window shutter tight, then with his wife took down the china from the closet, slipped aside the closely fitting panels, and secreted the girdle in a little place under one of the shelves. Then the panels were carefully put back, the china put in its place, and the closet door shut. To look at it, one would never have dreamt that there was any treasure there more than the old china. The prince thanked his new friends, shook their hands heartily, and started off. Months and years passed. The couple worked early and late. Indeed, they had to, as by this time their family had increased and their little sons would someday need education. After a time, the French made war on the Germans. Frankfurt, the city of this family, felt it sadly. A great many people had to flee for their lives, amongst whom were these honest folks. The soldiers went into their house, searched and carried off everything that was worth taking. Then the war closed, and the people returned. Years after this, the prince came back. He had heard as a wanderer about the different countries how many of the poor of his city had suffered. He quietly settled down in a country home, not far from the city, and never thought of going after his treasures, supposing they had either been stolen in the ransacking of the house, or that the young man in whose care he had left them had used them for his own wants or those of his family. He was not thoroughly acquainted, however, with the character of him to whom he had committed his treasures. One morning while he was at breakfast, he was told that a person wished to see him on business. The man was ordered to be conducted to his presence. Who should it be but his old friend?
The prince was as glad to see him as he was surprised. "I came," said the man, "to talk with you about the treasure you left me." "Oh, don't mind that at all," interrupted the prince, "but come and take some breakfast with me. I pray, don't mention the affair. I am glad it was there to do you good at a time when you must have needed it so much. Sit down and let us drink this coffee and forget all about it." The man took the chair which was offered him, and as he sat down, he said, "Believe me, Prince, your treasure is safe." The robbers went again and again to the old china closet, and took every dish and cup away, and, indeed, almost everything else that belonged to us, but, thanks to God, they did not find your treasure. When we went back to our house, we found it in exactly the same spot where you saw us place it, and there it is now. It only awaits your order to be restored to you as you gave it. The prince was astonished and said, "Really, my friend, I scarcely believed that such virtue was to be found anywhere. But I see now that a man's integrity may stand the hardest trial. You have taught me to have a better opinion of human nature." A few days later the prince called at the house and received his girdle without a stone missing. So delighted was he that not only did he reward him liberally, but everywhere he went he told the story. He did not think that all the presents he could give him would reward him sufficiently, so he wished to make him famous. He succeeded. The world heard the tale, and the humble man soon became the friend of princes and nobles. His sons were educated in the same principles of honesty and integrity, and the whole commercial world learned to honor his name. At this day, the families are scattered about in the greatest cities of Europe and are able to control the wealth of nations. Their possessions are immense. That poor boy was no other than Rothschild, and his sons and grandsons have been and still are the world's greatest bankers.
My boy, be honest. Nothing is safer, more honorable, or right. As such it is better than might and worth more than gold. It hurts no man, but wields an influence that commands the admiration of man and God. When Longfellow was 17 years of age, he wrote to his father, "Whether nature has given me any capacity for knowledge or not, she has, at any rate, given me a very strong predilection for literary pursuits. And I am almost confident in believing that, if I can ever rise in the world, it must be by the exercise of my talent in the field of literature. Whatever I study ought to be engaged in with my soul, for I will be eminent in something. It is possible, practical, absolutely necessary for any boy who would be eminent in any vocation to be first of all eminent in honesty or purpose in dealing with himself and others." Lowell was built on the Merrimack River. Dams and canals were constructed to conserve the water power. At that time there was no competent engineer in America, so a young Englishman by the name of Francis was brought over. After looking over the work done, he went to the directors of the company and said, "Gentlemen, you must rebuild Lowell and the works." "We can't do that," was the answer. "We have spent large sums and must take a risk." "Then, gentlemen," said Francis, "here's my resignation." The directors, after thinking of the awful flood that had swept that valley years before, reconsidered and rebuilt under the young man's direction. 1 year later a flood came in the town and work stood the test. Honesty always does. "Be just" is a mandate from the court of conscience. The law that form is the golden rule: all things whatsoever you would that men should do unto you, ye even so unto them. If you would be just, never change the venue of your cases from the form of your conscience, even though you might, outside the vicinage of conscience, be the winner every time. Venue changes from one civil forum to another, often brand the taker as a coward. Frequently it happens in the business world and in social trials. If one shies around the court of conscience in selecting his tribunal, he may win a verdict that will bear no scrutiny thereafter in the court of error, supreme on high. Be just to self, unmarred by vice, just appearance as admonished by the words, "Honor thy father and thy mother," just a brother and sister, and thus respect the home that sent you forth. The animals that serve us nobly should be treated justly. Shame and indignation rest upon the one who harshly treats the noble horse. Justice rules the throttle of the heart of him who glides along the way of life, and teaches him to render unto man his proper dues at every station on the journey. Archbishop Abbot of Canterbury, when preaching the funeral sermon of Lord Buckhurst, did not dwell on his merits as a statesman, or his genius as a poet, but upon his virtues as a man in relation to the ordinary duties of life. How many rare things were in him, said he, one of which was justice. The first and most essential exercise of love toward other persons is respect of their rights. It is a virtue that will govern one's thoughts, engineer one's actions, influence one's life, and command a universal esteem of mankind. To be just means to deal fairly with others. It is conformity to the principle of right, truthfulness to promise, faithfulness to engagement, and trustworthiness in every capacity. True, it is not always done.
In business, wrong methods, short measures, false weights are often used. In society, misrepresentation seems to hold an important part, but no boy need resort to such measures, for he can succeed without them. When Athens was governed by the 30 tyrants, Socrates was summoned to the Senate chamber in order to go with others whom they named, to seize one Leon, a man of rank and fortune whom they determined to slay that they might enjoy his estate. This commission Socrates positively refused. "I will not willingly," said he, "assist in an unjust act." One of the tyrants sharply replied, "Dost thou think, Socrates, to talk in this high tone, and not suffer?" "Far from it," replied he, "I expect to suffer 1,000 ills, but none so great as to do unjustly." Percy tells of a Persian king who desired a little salt to season some venison while on a hunting expedition. One of his attendants went to a neighboring village and took some by force. The king, suspecting the theft, ordered that he should immediately go and pay for it, saying, "This is a small thing in itself, but a great one as regards me, for a king ought always to be just, because he is an example to his subjects, and if he swerves in trifles he will become dissolute. If I cannot make all my subjects just in the smallest thing, I can at least show them that it is possible for me to be so. Injustice in word or deed, however small, is a crime which may benefit the doer for a time, but which will eventually pain him more than him to whom it is done. If thou hadst," said Carlyle, "all the artillery of the world marching at thy back in the support of an unjust thing, it would not be a success. If the thing is not just, thou hast not succeeded." A Moorish king desired to purchase a piece of ground from a woman who preferred to keep it. Thereupon the king seized it and built upon it a pavilion. The poor woman complained to the Cadi, and he promised to do all in his power to make it right.
One day, while the king was in the field, the Cadi came with an empty sack and asked to fill it with the earth on which he was treading. Having obtained leave, he filled the sack, and then requested the king to complete his kindness by helping him load it on his horse. The monarch laughed and tried to lift it, but soon let it drop, complaining of its great weight. "It is, however," said the Cadi, "only a small part of the ground thou hast wrested from one of thy subjects. How then wilt thou bear the weight of the whole field, when thou shalt appear before the great judge laden with thine iniquity? The reproof was severe. The conscience of the king troubled him now like a rawhide lash, and he restored the field to its owner, together with the pavilion and the wealth it contained. When William the Conqueror left the shores of France 8 centuries ago to make conquest of England, the figurehead of the royal galley in which he sailed, and which led the fleet, was a golden boy pointing the way across the channel to England and to victory. Significant the symbol. What the future will be depends on the boys of the present, and if they point with justness toward themselves and others, it will mean the ushering in of a golden era. In being just, every boy should love himself to that extent to deal honorably with every faculty of his nature, giving it due authority in the government of his conduct. He should not allow his affections to be loose, his will to run haphazard like a clock without a pendulum, or his appetite to be always gratified, like the voracious whirlpool of Niagara, but with self-respect he should make them subservient to his better nature. In his early political days, President Garfield was urged to do some doubtful political action. He replied, "It is impossible. I must eat and sleep and live constantly with James A. Garfield, and I am bound to have his good opinion of my conduct, even if I must forfeit that of everybody else." "Here, sir, clean my boots," said a British officer to Andrew Jackson, who, when a boy of 13, was captured in the Revolutionary War. "I am a prisoner of war, sir, and I look for such treatment as I am entitled to." The officer flew into a rage, and, drawing his sword, aimed a blow at the boy's head. To ward it off, Andrew raised his arm, and the sharp blade cut the flesh to the bone. Years after, when Andrew was President of the United States, he would point to it as an evidence of the officer's injustice to him, when the rules of war acknowledged that he was simply exercising justness to himself. Every boy should also be just to others. "Do unto others as ye would they should do unto you" is a good motto. Following this, what a delightful world this would be. Better wages would be given, the poor, crime and criminals would decrease, less trickery would be associated with business, and a better standard in measuring one's conduct would be used. There once lived in Marseilles an elderly man who was considered a miser, because he carried on a flourishing business, yet never seemed to spend any more than he could help. He lived alone in one room, dressed poorly, and never allowed himself any luxuries. People pointed the finger of scorn at him on the street. Children mocked him as he passed, yet he never resented their unkindness. At last he was missed. Search being made, he was found dead in his room. In his hand was a paper. It proved to be a will by which the whole of his great fortune was given to provide the city of Marseilles with free and pure water for the use of all. For this object he had spared and saved and suffered shame and abuse, that the very people who had ill-treated him might be given this blessing for which they suffered. He had been unjustly criticized, because the people did not understand his motive.
How much better to speak and act justly. Cruel words wound, cruel actions crush. They may not be the most severe, but as a mouse can trouble an elephant, a gnat worry a lion, a flea disgust a giant. So these little unjust words and works make life unpleasant to those to whom they are done. Better employ Maximilian's motto, let justice be done though the heavens fall, for such will finally triumph for good. To be just on all occasions demands concentration of one's moral powers, as the capture of a strong city sometimes demands the forces both of land and sea. It is easy to be just to a friend, but one cannot afford to be otherwise to an enemy. Justice knows no class or caste. Thus the Egyptians represented it as a human form without hands or eyes, indicating that he accepted no bribes, knew no difference between friend or foe, was not influenced by fear or favor, but decided every case on its merits. During the reign of Frederick, King of Prussia, there was near Potsdam a mill which interfered with a view from the window of his palace. Annoyed by this inconvenience to his favorite residence, the king sent to inquire the price for which it would be sold. For no price, was the reply of the sturdy Prussian. In a moment of anger, Frederick gave orders that the mill be torn down. The king may do this, the miller quietly remarked, folding his arms, but there are laws in Prussia, and forthwith he commenced proceedings against the monarch. The court decided that the king must rebuild the mill, and pay besides a large sum of money as compensation for the injury which he had done. He was very mortified on learning this, but instead of disdaining the order, turned to his courtiers and said, I am glad to find that just laws and upright judges exist in my kingdom. Years after, the proprietor of the mill, having been reduced in circumstances, wrote to the king, stating if His Majesty now entertained a similar desire to obtain possession of the property, it would be very agreeable to him in his present embarrassed circumstances to sell the mill.
The king immediately wrote the following reply. My dear neighbor, I cannot allow you to sell the mill. It must remain in your possession as long as one member of your family exists, for it belongs to the history of Prussia. I lament, however, to hear that you are in circumstances of embarrassment, and forthwith enclose a check large enough to arrange your affairs. Consider me always your affectionate neighbor. My boy, be just. You can if you will, and there is no reason in all the varied activities and experiences of life why you should not. To thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night to day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Do not be just from a mercenary idea, for that is only another form of injustice. But be just because it is right, and right makes men, and men are the great need of the hour. Poise then, the cause and justice is equal scales, whose beam stands sure, whose rightful cause prevails. Whenever a brave, kind word needs to be said, say it. Whenever a brave, kind act needs to be done, do it. Always feed the songbirds, but spare their nests, sprinkle ashes in icy streets, that men and horses may not fall. Be kind to dumb creatures, nor grudge them your care. God gave them their life, and your love they must share. And he who the sparrow's fall tenderly heeds, will lovingly look on compassionate deeds. In our band of mercy we have a pledge which every boy should heed, which will make him not only happier but better and more merciful in all the relations of life. I will try to be kind to all harmless, living creatures, both human and dumb, and will try and protect them from cruel usage. Do this, my boy, and you will be happy in the doing. The story is related of a king who had a boy in whom he took great delight. He gave him beautiful rooms to live in, with rich pictures and books, and servants to wait on him wherever he went. He also provided teachers who were to impart knowledge to him of things which would make him good and great. But with all this the young prince was unhappy. He wore a frown wherever he went, and was always wishing for something he did not have. At length one day a magician came to court. He saw the scowl on the boy's face, and said to the king, "I can make your son happy and turn his frowns into smiles, but you must pay me a large sum for telling him the secret." "All right," said the king, "whatever you ask I will give." The price was agreed upon and paid, and the magician took the boy into a private room. He wrote something with a white substance on a piece of paper, then gave the boy a candle, and told him to light it, hold it under the paper, and see what he could read. He then departed. The boy did as he had been told, and the white letters turned into a beautiful blue. They formed these words, "Do a kindness to someone every day." The prince was very much impressed with these words and undertook to put them into practice, and this resulted in his becoming very popular and useful in the realm. Few words are greater in the English language than kindness. It is as mighty as it is gentle. Few things cost so little, yet benefit so much. But unkindness always arises from a heart inclined more or less to be cruel. Because of this, the memory of Nero has been treated with contempt for ages. When a boy, he delighted in torturing flies by pulling off their legs, and then watching them struggle to get away. When he became emperor, he burnt the Christians in his gardens, and wished that all the Romans had but one neck, that he might cut off their heads at one blow. Thoreau, on the other hand, is revered for his gentle, loving disposition. Though an ardent naturalist, he seldom, if ever, inflicted death for the sake of the furtherance of his scientific observations. About the year 1845, he took to the woods near Walden Pond, Massachusetts, and built a house, to the surprise of the raccoons and squirrels. But the animals soon learned that he meant them no harm. He would lie down on a fallen tree, or on the edge of a rock, and at his call they would come to him. Even the snakes would wind around his legs, and the squirrels would hide their heads in his waistcoat. The fish in the river knew him, and would allow him to lift them from the water. He could pull a woodchuck out of his hole by its tail. Rabbits and birds paid no heed whatever to him while he sat and watched them or plied his work by chopping trees and raising vegetables, and when he built his house over the nest of a wood mouse, which at first became alarmed, it soon became so tame as to pick the crumbs at his feet and nibble the cheese in his hand. Some years ago, General David S. Stanley was laying out the route for a great railroad across the plains. There were 2,000 men, 2,500 horses and mules, and a train of 250 wagons heavily laden. One day the general was riding at the head of the broad column, when suddenly his voice rang out, "Halt!" A bird's nest lay on the ground directly in front of him. In another moment the horses would have trampled on the nestlings. The mother bird was flying about and chirping in the greatest anxiety. But the brave general had not brought out his army to destroy a bird's nest. He halted a moment, looked at the little birds, and then gave the order, left oblique. Men, horses, mules, and wagons turned aside and spared the home of the helpless bird. Years after, those who crossed the plains saw a great bend in the trail, which was the bend made to avoid crushing the bird's nest. George Stevenson, when a boy, would never rob a bird's nest, because, as he used to tell his companions, it grieves the old bird. One day when his genius was changing the face of the earth by the railway engine, he went to an upper room of his house and closed a window. It had been open a long time because of the intense summer heat, but now the weather was becoming cooler, and Mr. Stevenson thought it would be well to shut it. 2 or 3 days later, he chanced to observe a bird flying against it with all its might, as if trying to break it. His curiosity was aroused. He went at once and opened the window, and as he did so, the bird flew straight to one particular spot in the room, where Stevenson saw a nest. The poor bird looked at it and then fluttered to the floor, broken-hearted and almost dead. The great man drew near. There sat the mother bird, and under her wings 4 tiny ones, all dead. Tenderly he lifted the exhausted bird from the floor and carefully tried to revive it, but it speedily died. In its beak was a worm it had long struggled to bring to its home and little ones, and as Mr. Stevenson looked, he wept. The brave Colonel John Sobieski thought the unwanton killing of birds nothing short of murder. Speaking of one of his hunting trips, he said, sauntering leisurely along under tall elms, I heard a bird singing, and looking up, I saw a wee bit of a bird perched upon a lofty limb, singing very sweetly. Without a moment's thought, and without the slightest idea that I could hit so small a mark, I up and banged away. I saw some feathers fly, and the little songster came dropping down from branch to branch, and fell at my feet. I stooped down and picked it up. It was a tiny little thing, not much bigger than my thumb, of a yellowish-green color, as beautiful as it could be. Then, like a flash, the thought came to me, what a contemptible deed I have done. Here was one of God's beautiful creatures that had just as much right to existence as I, and its life, doubtless, was as sweet to it as mine was to me. And at that very moment that it was singing its beautiful songs to make the world more pleasant and glorious, I had brutally shot it to death.
I carefully buried it among the leaves, and then promised myself that I would never again wantonly destroy life. I regard this the greatest crime I ever committed. Sometimes boys are unkind to dumb animals, teasing them for sport or imposing on them for gain. Few animals show more fidelity and attachment to us than the dog and horse. What warnings the former gives! How faithfully he watches by day and night! With what cheerful alacrity the shepherd goes for the cattle and the mastiff protects the home! How many lives have been saved from a watery grave by the Newfoundland, or from a snowy one by the St. Bernard? Walter Scott tells of a dog which saved his master from being burned alive. The dog of Montargis vainly defended his master against the enemy, but successfully led to the discovery of the murderer. A pet spaniel saved the life of William the Silent by scratching his face when asleep. A body of Alva's Spanish troops surprised Dutch William's camp, and though his guards perished, he effected his escape by mounting a horse. In the excavation of the buried city of Herculaneum, the skeleton of a dog was found stretched over that of a boy 12 years of age, which he endeavored to save from death by suffocation or fire. All that remained to tell the story of its fidelity was a collar with an inscription that told how on 3 occasions it had saved the life of its master, once from the sea, once from robbers, and once from wolves. Of the horse, many beautiful and pathetic stories are related. It is said they never forget a road once traveled, and are very loving in their attachment. During the Peninsular War, a trumpeter of French cavalry was killed. Many days after the engagement, his body was found, guarded by his faithful charger, which had stayed by its dead master, protecting his body. When found, the poor horse was in a sad condition. So great was its grief that even after the trumpeter had been buried, it required great persuasion to be prevailed upon to eat. Some animals can take their part, as many a boy, through lacerated fingers and severe wounds and bruises, knows. But there are many which cannot, yet every one is entitled to and appreciates kindness. There is, as Ruskin said, a flash of strange light through which their life looks out and up to our great mystery of command over them, and claiming the fellowship of the creature, if not of the soul. Boys should be kind to one another. Unkind acts are lasting as indelible ink. They are like letters written in lemon juice, which become legible when brought before the fire. They stir the heart, awaken memory, and distress the soul. A prominent lawyer who became Attorney General of Missouri relates that while in Governor Stewart's office, a convict was brought in from the penitentiary to receive a pardon at the governor's hands. The convict was a steamboat man, with the rough manners of his class. Looking at him, the governor became greatly affected. Then he signed the document which restored the man's liberty, but before handing it over said, "You will commit some crime, I fear, and will soon be back in prison." The man protested that such a thing should never again happen. "You will go back to the river and be a maid again, I suppose?" asked the governor. The man said that was his intention. "Well, I want you to pledge me your word that when you are made again you will never take a billet of wood and drive a poor sick boy out of his bunk to help load your boat on a stormy night." The man promised that he never would, and in surprise asked the governor why he desired such a pledge. "Because," answered he, "someday that boy may become governor, and you may want him to pardon you for some crime. One stormy black night, many years ago, you stopped your boat on the Mississippi to take on a load of wood. There was a boy on board working his passage from New Orleans to St. Louis, but he became sick and was lying in his bunk. You had enough men to do the work, but you went to that sick boy, drove him to the deck with blows and curses, and kept him toiling like a slave till the load was complete. I was that boy. Here's your pardon. Never again be guilty of so brutal an act." The prisoner took the pardon, covered his face, and went out, ashamed of his conduct, and greatly affected by the charity of one who showed mercy when he could have had revenge.
My boy, be kind. If a man would have friends, he must show himself friendly. A little thought and a little kindness, said Ruskin, are often worth more than a great deal of money. Of Cornelius Vanderbilt it was said, he was a man of the utmost kindliness, who treated all, of whatever station, with courtesy, and age with deference. Julian Ralph, writing of General Wade Hampton, said, "He was a gentleman, and the qualities of mercy, kindliness, and protection to the lowly were strong in his blood." It is kindness in the heart, on the lips, and at the fingertips, which wins the affection not only of beasts and birds, but also of men, women, and children. Be kind in voice. No member has more power of good or evil. A single word may sting like an adder, or soothe like oil. It can thrill to action, drive to madness, or lead to despair. It can cut the heart like sorrow, or cheer like sunshine. Look out for your words. Take care of the tones. It is not always so much what one says as the manner in which it is said. Elihu Bird wisely remarked, "There is no one thing that love so much needs as a sweet voice, to tell what it means and feels." One must start in youth, and be on the watch night and day, at work and play to get and keep a voice that shall speak at all times the thoughts of a kind heart. During the famine in Russia, when thousands were reduced to the verge of starvation, Count Tolstoy passed a beggar on the street corner. Stretching out his gaunt hands, the miserable creature asked for alms. Tolstoy felt in all his pockets for a coin to bestow upon him. He turned his pockets inside out, but to no purpose. His money had already been spent in charity, and he had nothing. Taking the beggar's hand in both of his, he said, "Do not be angry with me, brother, I have nothing with me." The gaunt face lighted up, the man lifted his bloodshot eyes, his blue lips parted in a smile. "But you called me brother, that was a great gift," he said. "Yes, kind words, gentle words, sympathetic words are cheap. They cost nothing, but profit greatly. They are like oil to machinery. They disarm anger and are a tonic to the disheartened. Therefore, keep a watch on your words, my boy. For words are wonderful things. They are sweet like the bee's fresh honey. Like bees, they have terrible stings. They can bless like the warm, glad sunshine, and brighten the lonely life. They can cut in the strife of anger. Yes, cut like a two-edged knife. Be kind and act. Hands are deaf and dumb, but they should be the instruments of a tender heart, having a soft touch. Gladstone, with an empire on his shoulders, found time to leave Parliament and carry flowers to a little sick crossing sweeper. A small girl selling chestnuts arrested the attention of a young man who gave her a shilling. Years after, a poor man called upon a rich bank director to ask for a position as messenger. The director's wife recognized him as he passed out. She learned his business with her husband and said with earnestness, "Give him the situation." "Why?" he asked. The wife told the story how he had given her the shilling. The husband was pleased to favor his wife, and that night the man received a note as he sat by his sick wife. Opening it, he exclaimed, "Good news, wife. We shall not starve. Here's a promise of a situation." His wife called his attention to something that fell upon the floor. It was a 50-pound note folded in a paper bearing the inscription, "In grateful remembrance of the shilling which a kind stranger bestowed on a little girl selling chestnuts 20 years ago. Be kind, my boy. There is a magic charm connected with it." So thought William Cooper, who said he would not trust a man who would with his foot crush a worm. So thought the private secretary of President Lincoln when he found him in the Capitol grounds trying to put a little bird back to the nest from which it had fallen. So thought George Dana Boardman, who could not enjoy the so-called sports of hunting and fishing because of the suffering they wrought upon the innocent and helpless. Ah, my lad, just as Androcles extracted the thorn from the lion's paw, and was afterwards defended by that lion, kindness seldom goes unrecompensed. It gives satisfaction to the donor and comfort to the donee. You never can tell when you do an act just what the result will be. But with every deed you are sowing a seed, though its harvest you may not see. Each kindly act is an acorn dropped in God's productive soil, which you may not know, yet the tree shall grow and shelter the brows that toil. God blesses still the generous thought, and still the fitting word he speeds, and truth at his requiring taught, he quickens into deeds. One of the noblest traits which a boy can cultivate in his relations with his fellows is that of generosity. He is a mean fellow who is always thinking and planning for himself only and seeking to get the advantage of others. A noble-hearted, manly boy thinks of the welfare of those around him and is always ready to lend a hand to those that are in need. Deeds of generosity tend to develop a character which everybody admires. Generosity pays. It begets self-respect, enlarges a boy's views and sympathies, and brings him into delightful relationship with kindred minds. If you have anything especially good, don't fail to share it with others who have less or none. Be generous.